Well, hello everyone out there and welcome to this free webinar with Alphacrucis College. My name is Chris, I'm a junior lecturer here at Alphacrucis and we're just so excited that you are here. If you're wondering, yes, if you've come for the talk about revelations and conspiracy theories, you are in the right place. We've got people from all around Australia and some people actually even internationally joining with us this afternoon, which is really exciting. And what I'd love for you to do, so we can all get acquainted and connected with one another, I'd love you to change your chat function to include everyone and tell us all where you're from. So throw in the chat where your location is. Are you in Brisbane, Queensland? I can see there's people from Perth, Western Australia here. I think I even saw someone say they're from Bathurst, which is amazing. So please throw in the chat where you are from, and we would love to hear so we can see and be connected with one another. Well, as a college, we put these webinars on because we are absolutely convinced that we are called to equip Christian leaders to change the world. And I'm assuming that you're here most likely because you are a Christian or a Christian leader of some sort. And we hope that today's session, which is going to be really good, actually equips you not just to have a great knowledge and understanding about things, but actually equips you to do what you're called to do better than you've ever done it before. I'm sure there's lots of pastors here who have gotten lots of questions about conspiracy theories in the book of Revelations over the last year or two. I'm sure there's daughters and sons who have spoken to their mum and dad about these sorts of conspiracy theories. I'm sure there's mum and dads trying to talk to their sons and daughters and everyone in between, because we are living in a very interesting time, aren't we? We're living in a time where there's things like floods, there's wars and rumors of wars, and there's all sorts of things going on. There's pandemics, there's lockdowns, and sometimes it's a little bit maybe hard for us to navigate through this changing situation that we're finding ourselves in every day. But more than that, there's this thing that seems to be lying underneath all of it, which these grand conspiracies are telling us what's happening and why they're happening and what's the reason for it all. But what do? Do we read the post on Facebook? Do we listen to that uncle? Do we read our Bible? What on earth do we do in these challenging times? And even more than that, how do we understand the times that we find ourselves within? Well, if you've got those questions, and I'm assuming you do, hopefully today's session will actually help a little bit with that. And what I'm going to do in a moment is introduce our speaker that we have with us today. So how about we get started? So the way today is going to work is I'm going to introduce our speaker in a moment, and then we're going to have a bit of a quick chat with Jon. We're going to go through what he studied, some of his understanding in the book of Revelations, and then we're actually going to throw some questions to you, the audience. Now, in the kind of registration of this event, there was actually a lot of questions being asked from a lot of you, which is really exciting. I need to be honest, it was actually a little bit overwhelming with the amount of questions coming through. So what I've done is I've tried to navigate this really well and kind of summarize some of the questions into groupings. So I'm hoping we can get through something that's going to relate to your question if you've already asked one. But if you've got more, there is down the bottom a Q&A function. If you can please make sure you post your question in the Q&A function. Well, how about we get into it? I was talking to Professor Jon before today, and he was talking to me about his study in the book of Revelation. And if you don't know Jon, you're about to know him, Jon Newton. He's actually written 3 books on the book of Revelation. His PhD was on the book of Revelation and postmodernity. He's considered a world expert on this topic, which is it's such a privilege to be able to chat with him today. Jon's actually been a part of churches, local churches. He's been a part of the AOG movement for many years. And now the ACC movement, for many years. Jon is still a senior lecturer with Alphacrucis College here. He's a HDR supervisor, and he's still, of course, writing really prevalently in these fields as well. So would you join with me? If you can, click the little clap icon on Zoom, and please welcome Jon Newton with us. Jon, how are you?
Hi, I'm really well, thank you. And how are you?
Doing well, thanks, John. Doing well, thanks, John. Now, John said to me that he's hoping everyone's got their notepads and pens out because he's got a big whiteboard. He's going to roll from side of screen, of course, to draw us a graph, to give us some dates. No, not at all. But John, look, how about we get into you, John? Let's first connect with you. Why on earth do you think it's important for us to talk about conspiracy theories in this current climate we find ourselves in?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. Well, obviously conspiracy theories are big time. They come and go. At the moment, we've had conspiracy theories about vaccines. We're now having a new lot of conspiracy theories, or at least attempts at them, regarding the situation in Ukraine. It's hard to predict when the next kind of a conspiracy theory will come from, but they're not new. You know, I was thinking back, perhaps the first conspiracy theory I could find in the Bible is in the book of Esther, where that particular man who didn't like his Jewish compatriot, so to speak, started to spread a theory that the whole Jewish race needed to be wiped out. Well, that's not new, is it? Of course, we know that our good friend Adolf Hitler had a go at that. And he got a lot of support all around Europe because that conspiracy theory about anti-Semitism was alive and kicking and still is, unfortunately, in some parts of Europe. So conspiracy theories are not new, and linking them to the book of Revelation or the Bible more broadly is also not new. And there are lots of things in the book of Revelation that are a little bit hard to understand, or maybe a bit threatening, a bit violent imagery, etc. And that lends itself often to conspiracy theories.
So, John, yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? And I do love that approach, that conspiracy theories have been around for a long time, and maybe we're more aware of them now because of the digital revolution and the information age we find ourselves in. We can be connected via Facebook and whatnot. So, John, do you sort of see then that conspiracy theories are having definitely a really loud voice in society at the moment? But why do you think they're being connected to the book of Revelations? I know you commented there on imagery, but do you think there's something else going on there?
Well, I think a lot of the problem is we expect things from the book of Revelation that it really wasn't designed to deliver. So we're expecting it to predict what's going to happen in the next decade or two, or we're expecting it to provide us with running commentary on events of our day. And that's really, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment when we do that. But, you know, there's lots of things in Revelation that you think, well, it does look like a conspiracy. And there are, let's face it, there is a conspiracy. There is a conspiracy. There is a devil. And he is always trying to spread lies. And he is always trying to bring us down. So, of course, he's the author of a lot of those conspiracy theories. He's trying to pull wool over our eyes so we don't get an idea of what he's doing. But also a lot of people I'm finding, and maybe this is just human nature, a lot of people I'm finding are so obsessed with what is the devil doing that they're not asking, what is God doing? And the book of Revelation is more about what God is doing than what the devil is doing.
Wow, what a beautiful way to look at that, to actually reorientate ourselves to focusing on what is truly important, rather than maybe what can distract us and what can be fanciful and easy and tickles our ears a little bit. Thanks so much for sharing that, John. So, John, maybe let's go from conspiracy theories into your study in the book of Revelation. Firstly, why on earth did you study this book? Because it's sort of that book in specifically Pentecostalism, and I say that as a Pentecostal, that I can remember was just sort of pushed to the back. No one really knew what to do with it when I was growing up. So, John, why on earth did you choose to study the book of Revelation?
Yes, well, in my case, there were a lot of people talking about the book of Revelation in a certain period of history. I was in a kind of generation just before you where a lot of Pentecostals thought they really did know what Revelation was about. And there was a lot of preaching and teaching going on around it, seminars and all sorts of things. One of the perpetrators or the beginning of that was a guy called Hal Lindsey, who wasn't a Pentecostal, but who wrote a book called The Late Great Planet Earth back in the 1970s. And that was the first time I'd really thought about those sort of things very much. My eschatology was, you know, heaven and hell, and that was about it. And he made me think, okay, is the Bible predicting, like he said, for example, that the Bible is predicting the rise of China? Well, he got that one kind of right. And a number of other things that that weren't so happy. But he made us ask these sort of questions. And before we knew it, there was a rash of books and movies. And you know, then there was a Left Behind series a bit later on. And so I started, well, what's really true here? What's going on? And as I started studying this and even teaching it a little bit, I started thinking, no, some of what I've been taught, it's just not on. It's just not working. It's not only not happening, but it's not really what the Bible is saying after all. And so that's where I started to really, I want to dig into the book of Revelation. I want to get some real truth. I want to see what is the book of Revelation really talking about. And that was a long journey. I think I started detailed study in it in the early 1990s. It then became a big part of my master's degree in the late 90s, and then my doctorate. And then even since then, I've been studying it. And of course, I finally put out a commentary a year ago. I feel like I've come to some understanding after all this time. And it's been actually a very, very fun journey.
Yeah, wow, Jon. I actually really appreciate the fact that when being confronted with something that maybe was a little bit scary and something that didn't make sense, I know that I would probably shy away from it and try to ignore it. But I love that our Christian faith, and I think you've embodied it really well, actually almost seeks for us and desires for us to push into it, doesn't it? And to actually not just take the easy road out, but really ask the hard questions and really study it well. And I really appreciate that, Jon. So Jon, if you've found really great benefit, to reading and studying this book of Revelations for 30 years or so, why do you think it's important for us to study it today?
Well, short answer, it's in the Bible. So it's something from God. And if it's from God, then it's got something for us. Now, I want to also say to people, you've got to think about what it meant to the original audience. But it's along with that, you know, this is a message from God, and it has a specific promise. Blessed is the one who reads and those who hear the voice of this prophecy and keep what is written in it. So, in other words, there's benefit from reading the book of Revelation. There's benefit for us to get the perspective that God brings to us, which we can then apply to things around us, providing we do it in a modest and humble kind of way, if I can put it that way, so that we don't jump to conclusions too arrogantly or dogmatically. But also the book of Revelation it's in the New Testament as well. In spite of this, some commentators years ago who said, oh, it was really more an Old Testament type book. It didn't really have anything of gospel in it. I'm going, you haven't read it very well. It's actually got a message that resonates very strongly with the Gospels and with the rest of the New Testament. So we can't do without it.
Yeah, absolutely, Jon. I think that's a great point. It is in the New Testament, isn't it? It's in the Bible. It's something we should really have focus to. Now, I'm aware you mentioned already like the Left Behind series and maybe some other interactions you've had with the book of Revelations through alternative media and other books in your past. I even say that, like, I remember the Left Behind series, and I remember being terrified about them when I was a kid. I know in our practice session, I was sharing with you that I got saved at a Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flame play. So it's been definitely a theme through my life. I remember hearing truck horns and getting terrified because I thought it was the trumpets of the second coming. So this has definitely been a theme. And I think a lot of us actually come to this book with a lot of presuppositions, a lot of things that we think we're going to find in the book. So what I'd love to do is actually to almost even the playing field a little bit. Jon, if you had the opportunity to explain the book of Revelations to someone who's never heard of it, someone who's maybe never interacted with the scriptures, how would you describe it? How would you explain the book to someone?
Well, I'm actually thinking of writing a little book called The True Apocalypse, or The Real Apocalypse. Book of Revelation is an unusual form of literature that was around in the around about the time of the beginnings of Christianity and a little bit earlier. That was fairly common across a number of cultures where people would use weird symbolic kind of language and prophesy certain things. Sometimes they were things that had already happened. Revelation, of course, doesn't do that. But what it does do is it seeks to bring a God perspective on the world. So for someone who doesn't ever understand the book, let's understand, first of all, what kind of book it is. So it's apocalyptic. Apocalyptic doesn't mean what we mean often by that word today. It means revelation. It means that God is revealing something important that we wouldn't otherwise know or see by our own ordinary investigations. Secondly, it's prophecy, which means basically it's a word from God. Now, it also includes some prediction. I'm not knocking that, but a word from God is the primary meaning of prophecy. Thirdly, it's a letter that was written to 7 specified churches in what was then the province of Asia, which is now part of Turkey. These churches were Christian churches that were really only in their infancy, only been going 20, 30, 40 years. And the author is trying to bring encouragement and guidance and blessing to those churches. And that is then something that we can learn from as well. So these are the kinds of things that I like people to understand before they even start reading the book of Revelation, is what kind of book that they're going to encounter. But the other thing I would say to people who've never read the book before is remember that the book is primarily about Jesus Christ. It's primarily a revelation of Jesus and about Jesus, and Jesus is the central character in the book. So don't start going off at, oh, it's the Antichrist, or it's this, or it's that. Okay, so some of those people have a bit part to play, but they're not the main feature of the book. It's mainly about Jesus.
Wow, I really think that just that alone, us reading the book of Revelation again with Jesus as the focal point, I'm sure is going to change a lot of people's way that they're reading this book. So I suppose, and if you've explained the book of Revelation to us this way, that it's a letter, that it's apocalyptic, that it's full of encouragement as well, how do you think people read it? You've been around the traps quite a lot. How do you think people are coming to this book then? If hopefully some of them are coming to it the way that you've described, but how do you think they're coming to it?
Well, I said in my first book, Revelation Reclaimed, that there are 5 main bad ways that people read Revelation. So I'll just talk about the first 4 because they're the most important. People read it because they think it's predicting the future. And so people will build whole movements on that. Oh, I've worked out, Jesus coming in. You might have read, there was a book many years ago, probably before your time, Chris, the 88 Reasons Why the Rapture will be in 1988. Now, I don't know how much of Revelation that author used, but people come up with these things expecting the Bible to predict specific things like that. Second thing is people come at it thinking it'll tell them what is going on right now. It'll make a comment on Putin invading the Ukraine. That's probably not a bad example because people often say, well, the Bible tells us he's going to invade Israel. So this is just the beginning of that. And, they bring in Revelation 20 about Gog and Magog and the parallel passage in Ezekiel. Again, it's a bad way of reading Revelation because Revelation was not designed for that and it won't work for you. You will end up confused. And this is what happened to a lot of people in the 1980s and 90s in the Pentecostal world in Australia, where we'd been told that the Bible and the book of Revelation predicted this, and this, and then those things didn't happen. So people suddenly think, oh, forget it, throw the book of Revelation out. No, don't throw it out. Learn to read it properly. 2 other ways that I sometimes see people misuse the book. They think it's about them. They think it's about their particular movement. So you might be surprised to know that the early Pentecostals, some of them believed that only Pentecostals were going to go up in the rapture before the tribulation. Now, I don't really buy into that whole area very much, but they thought they were different for the rest of the church in that regard. So they were using Revelation to validate their special role in the body of Christ. Or the opposite. We use Revelation to bash our enemies. And I have heard it used so many times to bash the Catholic Church, the World Council of Churches, the United Nations, the European Union, etc., etc., etc. Whoever is the favorite enemy at the moment. The thing is, these are common, and you'll still see it in a lot of books. You go into a Christian bookshop, and that really annoys me because I would have thought people would have learnt better by now.
Yeah, absolutely, John. It seems like a lot of this is kind of sprouting from this formation of people really misusing the book, trying to use it, sorry, maybe better languages, trying to use it for something it was never intended to use it for. Yeah, and with that, you've told us maybe how not to use the book, not using it just to predict future events, or not using it just to understand our current situations. Well, what are some things in mind that we that are good habits for us to have when we're reading the book of Revelation? What are some things we should be thinking of when we're to help us in our interpretation of this book?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is read it. Okay, and read it all the way through, and don't just pick out the gory bits or the bits that are sensational or seem very relevant. Revelation is not written in Martian. It's not that difficult to get a hold of some of the main themes if you read it with an open mind, not going down one of those rabbit holes that I just mentioned. The second thing, as with any book from the Bible, we always start by asking, what would it have meant to its original readers? Revelation was not written to you and me. It was written to those 7 ancient churches. What could it have meant to them? So if we start trying to think, well, you know, this might be about Putin invading Israel or something like that. Well, hang on, could it possibly have had any meaning like that to those original people? Now, I know sometimes there are things in the Bible that only become clear later. I get that. But that doesn't stop us from answering that question, because if a book means nothing to the original readers, it's not going to be passed on. It's not going to be copied. It's not going to survive. So that's something very important. But of course, balanced with that, it's in the Bible, so it's got a message for us today. So we do ask it. Now, I said a minute ago that we shouldn't use it as a means of interpreting our current period and current events in any kind of political kind of way. On the other hand, it does provide us with a kind of a paradigm for interpreting our world. It does show us things that we wouldn't otherwise see. So, for example, Book of Revelation is strongly about spiritual warfare. It's strongly got stuff about God versus the devil and the different aspects of that battle that are portrayed in the Book of Revelation. So that's something we need to know, and that's something we need to have in our minds when we look at the events that are going on today. But of course, as I said, it's sometimes easy to focus too much on the devil and not enough on God. And so one of the important things when you're reading Revelation is, what is God doing? What is God's program? So the Revelation is a story. And that's one of the important ways of reading it that I learned after reading it over and over again. It's a war story. So a lot of the more violent language in Revelation comes about from the fact that there is a struggle going on, that God is, in a sense, invading the world. God is putting down his enemies, so to speak. And therefore, that's one way we read the book. We can also read it as a love story, because near the book of Revelation, what do we get? We get a wedding. What kind of novel or what literature ends with the wedding? Well, a romance. So a lot of the book of Revelation is about the romance between Christ and his church. And that language comes out over and over again when you read the book carefully. But all of that shows us that God has a program, and that God is working through his program to bring about the salvation of the world. And when we come to the end of the book of Revelation, what do we find? We find a new world that's, at peace with itself, at peace with God, healed, whole, and just beautiful. How do we get there? Well, that's what the rest of the story, not just the story of the book of Revelation, the story of the whole Bible. Revelation keeps taking us back to other parts of the Bible to show us and to bring them into the story, whether it be Genesis, Exodus, Isaiah, Daniel, or whatever. It brings those things into the book. The other thing to remember, I said it's about Jesus. In Revelation 5, when we have one of the big revelations about Jesus, he's seen as the lamb that was slaughtered and yet is still alive. And it says there that he was slain, and with your blood, you purchased people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And then in chapter 7, we get a glimpse of those people, and they're an uncountable multitude. So this is one of the things that really, really excites me when I read Revelation. God wins. A huge number of people are going to be in the kingdom by the time we finish. And that also motivates me to work for the kingdom of God and to testify to Jesus. The heroes of the book of Revelation, contrary to what some of the books might tell you, are not the people who get safely raptured or whatever out of the earth when things are getting tough, but the people who actually die because they testify to Jesus. I think Christians in places like China and Iran and places where they're doing it really tough probably get more out of the book of Revelation than we get even in the West. That's a long answer, but I hope it helps.
Jon, I loved it. And it was so inspiring for us as the church, specifically the church maybe who are quite comfortable in the West, to actually continue our missional heart. It's inspiring for us to remember those and the other situations that people are facing, and inspired to be a part of those who are willing to be those who carry the gospel to all the parts of this world. And is that not a good mission to be a part of? And that's something, I agree with you, something that should evoke hope within us, not something that should discourage us. So I wonder then almost that when we read the book of Revelation and we come to the end of it, we should be a more hopeful people, shouldn't we, Jon? Not a people weighed down and depressed by what could be going on.
We should be hopeful. We should be passionate. I think the book of Revelation, the author really wants us to be absolutely passionately devoted to Jesus Christ and passionately committed to him. In that way, the book of Revelation is very similar to the synoptic gospels, where Jesus constantly calls people to all out surrender and commitment. That's the kind of Christian that the book of Revelation wants to shape and encourage.
Yeah, beautiful, passionate people. And it looks like passionate people who are eating a big meal together as well, which encourages me too, Jon. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that point. What I'd really love to ask is, I suppose there are this kind of this plethora of voices really who are speaking about this book, and you've already alluded to that maybe some aren't doing as well as others. Are there some voices that we could be or should be listening to in learning how to interpret this book, Jon, that you would suggest for us?
Well, there are good books on the book of Revelation.
Yours are the best. Yours are the best, though, I've heard, Jon. Yeah.
Well, I do recommend both my Revelation Reclaim, which is a more polemical book. It's more about what not to do with Revelation. And the commentary that I just put out, it's specifically a Pentecostal commentary. So Pentecostals are interested in the work of the Holy Spirit. We have a greater faith that the Holy Spirit will do the work of the Lord and that it won't be a failure in the end, in spite of all the difficulties we might face. And I think that's a really, really good way of getting into the book of Revelation. It helped me to see some of those positive things that I was just explaining to you. But there are other good books. A Catholic scholar called Frank Maloney here in Melbourne wrote a commentary, came out about 6 months before mine, and it's just called The Commentary on John's Apocalypse or something like that. So there are good books out there. I couldn't list them all off the top of my head, but again, if you grab my commentary, you could look in the bibliography and look at the footnotes. For example, one of my good friends, John Christopher Thomas, has actually written 2 commentaries on the book of Revelation, also from a Pentecostal kind of viewpoint, and they're both very readable and quite worthwhile to look at. But I would say, generally speaking, avoid the internet, avoid videos, avoid movies. On the whole, they might be very imaginative, but they're not very good theology.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Sometimes maybe the easiest way to to consume media may not be the best way to learn about things. So, with some of those suggestions, and just for those who are maybe wondering about Jon's book, we'll actually send out an email with a copy of the recording of this webinar and also some links to Jon's books as well. They are available through Amazon and I think at Kurong as well, Jon mentioned to me, which is really good. So we'll send those links out in the email over the next week or so. Jon, where I'd love to go now, before we get into some specific themes in the book of Revelation, is just to talk a little bit about maybe spiritual communities. I do really feel for church communities in this season and the way conspiracy theories have become so prevalent. And what's actually happened is we've found, and I think we've found this internationally, is this great polarization that's going on, isn't there? So what I'd love for you to suggest is in this world where in our churches, even where maybe there's a lot of divide happening and division happening between ideas on the book of Revelation or what the state of the world is, do you have any ideas for church pastors, for even lay people in their Christian communities or their families to bring some unity around this book? To provide a space, or do you have any ideas of something that they could do to provide some unity around this topic of Revelation, Jon?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, first of all, again, I'd say get people to read the book and not just to read books about the book or watch videos about the book, get them into the actual text. And the second thing, again, is get people to read it properly using some of the guidelines I've just mentioned here. And to not believe everything they hear. You know, it's funny how we work in this current age. You know, we teach students to think critically and everything, and often that's very one-sided. But a lot of people just accept a lot of things uncritically that they hear. You know, Facebook, Twitter, all these things. People read this stuff or watch this stuff, and they just blindly accept these conspiracy theories. You know, some of the stuff about the vaccines, for example, I think have you really checked this? Have you really looked this up properly? But of course, balancing that, we've got to say that everybody has the right and the privilege to, to navigate their lives and make their own decisions. And we do have to respect each other, even when we don't agree with each other. So, for example, you know, in the church that I belong to, there has been some divisions about some of these areas. And what we still have to all keep aiming is, okay, we don't agree on all this stuff, but we love each other, we respect each other, we're Christians together, and we're not going to be divided. We're not going to become enemies just because of your views. I have a little saying that I give to my students sometimes. The plain things are the main things, and the main things are the plain things. I didn't invent that, but so when we're talking about eschatology, for example, let's stick to the main things first. Let's stick, all right, Jesus is coming again. There's going to be a bodily resurrection at the end. There's going to be the last judgment, stuff like that. We know that. That's absolutely plain. We don't know for sure about the millennium. We don't know for sure about rapture and tribulations and all that. So let's not make that such a big issue. Have your ideas, okay? Think about them carefully, but don't make them a point of division.
Yeah, that's really, really encouraging, Jon, to focus on what unites us, maybe not focus on what divides us. And I think that even in reading the book of Revelation through this lens that Jesus is the main character and it's about Jesus is going to really help people with that, I think, already. And I hope that churches are encouraged to be able to help foster unity in the church, but also for us as individuals who are attending churches to do that as well, because it does take us all. Well, Jon, let's move from there now into a few of those kind of big themes that are often apparent within the book of Revelation and maybe the object of big discussions in people's churches or just on Facebook and whatnot. The first one I'd love to bring up is the mark of the beast. What is its purpose? How would you explain it? What is going on there in the book of Revelation?
Yeah. Well, of course, that's been debated and discussed ever since the book of Revelation was written. So don't be too sure you're going to find out the answer.
Oh, dang.
First thing to remember, of course, if you're going to have a mark of the beast, you've got to have a beast. And some people, particularly with this stuff about vaccines, have forgotten that small point. So again, we start with what would the original audience have thought? And it's pretty obvious that when you look at Revelation 13, even though it's highly symbolical with this big beast coming out of the sea and then another beast coming out of the land and all the other things that go on there, that he's almost certainly talking about the Roman Empire at that time. So you've got to remember that the people in Asia that Revelation was written to were living in a part of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was in its high point in the late first century. And these people were highly pro-Roman, the people in that area. They were probably more Roman than the Romans in some respects. And they were promoting, for example, the worship of the emperor. They were begging for permission to build temples to the emperor. They were having festivals to the emperor. And if you didn't join in, they would look at you strangely and possibly even do worse to you. So that's probably the kind of issue that they were facing. You've got to remember, and this is where I take issue with some people today, about saying, oh, look, the vaccines or something like that is the mark of the beast. Well, hang on, that's trivializing it. Whatever else the mark of the beast is, and I don't believe it's, identity marks under your skin or anything like that either, it's deadly. That is, if you don't take the mark, according to Revelation 13, you don't just get shut out from the shops, you get killed. So any candidate for mark of the beast has got to be that serious, that deadly. So I think, for example, that if you're wanting some modern examples, and I don't think the mark of the beast is meant to be a simple thing that only exists in one period of time. I think he's talking about issues that come up. So a couple of hundred years after Revelation was written, for example, the Roman Empire tried to enforce the worship of their ancient pagan gods on everybody, and you actually had to get a certificate that you'd made a sacrifice to the gods or to the emperor in order to avoid trouble. I think that could have been the mark of the beast for them. All right.
Yeah, sure.
If you're in China right now and you're in a church, you're being pressured to take down all crosses and all images about Jesus and instead to put up photos of Xi Jinping. That sounds a little bit like it could be a mark of the beast. I don't know that anyone's been killed for it yet, so maybe not quite. So that's an important thing. The other thing, of course, and this comes back again to the centrality of Christ and passion about Christ. In the next chapter, of course, chapter divisions can get in the way when you're reading the Bible.
Yeah,
because they're not there in the original text. Okay, there was no chapters and no verses. They're very useful to help you find your way around, but they can be a problem. But the very next verse after the 666 talks about the 144,000 witnesses standing there, and they have the name of God and the name of Jesus and his Father's name written on their foreheads. Now, I have never heard of anybody developing a conspiracy theory out of that. And yet that naming, the name of Jesus and God being on people's foreheads, is actually mentioned more often in the book of Revelation than the 666. Now, the 666 itself, again, I don't think anyone knows 100% what it means, but the most likely meaning of all the ones that I've read is that it's referring to the Emperor Nero. Okay, so there was a kind of a method that in those days where they used letters for numbers, that if you knew what your choices were, you could check out that word against this numerical value. So I won't go into all the details, but Nero is a good one because he was the first emperor to actually persecute Christians.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for unpacking that historical context. And you're right, it really does kind of open up what this book is meaning. That second chapter, the next chapter after the Mark of the Beast, about it being written on their heads, I think is a really beautiful contrast. Jon, I would wonder if you could speak to that just that a little bit more. Are you sort of suggesting that it's almost like there's like a warring allegiances or something going on in the text? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That having a mark on your forehead or your hand is a sign of allegiance. Okay, so the beast is trying to say, you give your allegiance to me. Okay, and that was probably referring to emperor worship at that time, or something like that. The pressure was on the Christians to do that. Let me just give you one little example from a place near where Revelation was written. Probably about 20 years later, there was a Roman governor there called Pliny, and he was having trouble with Christians because Christianity was growing rapidly in his area, so rapidly that temples to the gods were being deserted. And even the meat that was offered in the temples couldn't find anyone to buy it because the Christians wouldn't touch it. And so he's thought, I've got to persecute these people. I've got to suppress this movement. But of course, when you try and suppress a movement, before you know where you're at it, people will accuse their enemies of being part of that to get them into trouble. We see that a lot in Pakistan today, where people are always accusing Christians of blaspheming the Quran because they know if they can make that stick, the Christians will be in trouble. So he had to come up with a way of deciding, okay, who are Christians and who are real Christians and who are just being wrongly accused. And he worked out that no Christian would offer incense before a statue of Caesar, and no Christian would offer any kind of allegiance or homage to the traditional gods, Jupiter and all that crowd that the Romans worshipped. And so if someone was accused of being a Christian, he would test them on those two things. Oh, and the other one was no Christian would curse Christ. So he would try and get them, if someone said, oh, no, I'm not a Christian, he would test them on those 3 points.
Wow.
He'd really got onto something there, hadn't he? So it's allegiance, as you say. Is our allegiance to Jesus? That's what I'm talking about, passion. Okay. Are we willing to die for him if we have to? All right. Or is our allegiance primarily somewhere else? In which case, our Christianity won't last very long.
Yeah, and that's not only inspiring, it's actually also challenging. It's challenging us as individuals, but also us as a community of asking where our allegiances, where our goals, are they in the person of Christ and pursuing him? It is inspiring things. I'm just looking at the time. We've already only got 15 minutes left. What I'd probably love to do, Jon, is actually to go in some of the Q&As that we've had come through. Yep. I might have to say, and I don't want to rush you at all, but we might need to just, if we can hit maybe 2 or 3 questions that are a little bit quick here so we can get through some of them. I am aware as well the Q&A function is lighting up. We've got a whole lot of questions coming in. So please, I hope we can get to some of those as well. Jon, one of the questions that came through prior to this event was just about this concept of the last days. It's a comment that's often made by people. What does that actually mean? And where is that in the book of Revelations? What does it say in there about in the book of Revelation? What does it say in there about it?
As far as I know, the book of Revelation never uses that phrase. The New Testament uses it quite a bit, and it means basically the time that starts with Jesus. That's when Jesus arrives, we're in the last days. And that says that in Hebrews, it says that in Romans, I forget all of the different, Acts makes that very clear. So we've been living in the last days for around 2,000 years. So we've got to be very wary about people who are saying, oh, such and such is happening. You know, there's more wars, more earthquakes, whatever. And therefore, we must be living in the last days. Always take that with a bit of a grain of salt.
Yeah, that's really great. Okay, so the book, the last days approach is actually more of a New Testament idea, but it's really this anytime after Christ, really, isn't it? That's a great distinction. Another question we got, which I thought was really interesting, is quite a practical question. That if there was a pastor here, and it's a question from a pastor who wanted to maybe preach the Book of Revelation in their church and hopefully bring some maybe correction or understanding to how we understand that book, how would you suggest for them to start? Is there any kind of way that you think that they could do it to connect to the people there, and even being considerate of maybe some of the other opinions in the room from the Left Behind series or something like that?
Well, first of all, I said do some research. Okay, read the book yourself, read some good books about it. I think you would find my commentary. A few pastors have already told me they found my commentary very helpful. It's not overly technical, so people can understand it. So read a few good books that are like that. If you find your people are routinely, watching certain videos or whatever, you might have to watch a few of those too, just so you know what they're doing and what these people are saying. I mean, I read Tim LaHaye's commentary on Revelation when I was writing my first book, because I thought, what does this guy really think? So let's do some research. That's the first thing. Research your people and research the Bible and research what credible people are saying about the text. And then I would say, be modest. You're not going to explain everything. Don't try. Try and keep to the main points. As I said, try and make the main things the main things. Keep the focus on Jesus. Keep the focus on the church. Keep the focus on how we can respond with passion in our commitment to Jesus. And don't get too sidetracked on all the little details that you may not be able to really nail that closely.
Yeah, that's really profound. And I think that's some really great practical advice for a lot of the people here today. So thanks so much for that, Jon. One person who did write in asked a sort of question, even actually wondering about the similarities between conspiracy theories today and the ancient form of Gnosticism. And do you think Jon addresses Gnosticism a little bit, or maybe is Gnosticism addressed other places in the New Testament? Just for everyone here, Jon, I'd love you to explain, first of all, what Gnosticism was in the New Testament as well, because I'm sure not everyone is aware of it.
No. Well, full-blown Gnosticism is a little just after the New Testament, and it attempted to hijack some parts of the New Testament for its own benefits. Gnosticism is a kind of an outgrowth of a kind of Platonic view of the world that says that matter is evil and only spirit is good. And therefore, let me give you one just interesting example that would come from that. So what do you do with sex? Okay, so Gnostics went one of two directions, two opposite directions. Sex is evil, so we don't do it, even if you're married. No sex, none at all. Or the opposite. Well, matter is evil and it's not going to last, so just do what you like. Have as much sex with as many people as you like. So this is the kind of way. It's very infected with certain Greek kind of philosophical ways and also other ideas that were floating around in the world at that time. And they tried to hijack, as I said, some of the New Testament some of the New Testament, even the Book of Revelation, could be used a little bit that way. You get this dualistic idea of good and evil. Now, the New Testament never, ever goes down that road. It never says that matter is evil. And we know that for two very big reasons, amongst others. One is Christ, who is the Son of God, took on flesh. Okay, Absolutely. So there's number one. So the Gnostics kept saying, oh, no, he didn't really. He just appeared to have flesh. The second thing is the Bible promises that we will be bodily raised again from the dead. And the Book of Revelation does go there. and does tell us about what that new life will look like in the last 2 chapters. Yeah, that's probably as much as I probably can say at this stage.
No, that's really great to overview what Gnosticism is. And I suppose I know there's a lot to do with Gnosticism that is this almost obsession of like a secret knowledge and that they're aware of things that no one else is.
True.
And I know there are like different times when our church fathers have actually addressed the kind of damages of that to community and things like that. So thank you so much, John.
How about we just pick that point up? I should have picked that up too.
Yeah, sure.
The idea of secret knowledge. Okay. Because there are people who use the book of Revelation that way. You know, we've got the secret knowledge. We've got the key. We can crack the code. We now know what it all means. And when people say that to me, and people do, and people can say, would you read this book? It's got the secret, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I've learned to take all of that with a grain of salt because I've read so many theories and all of them were totally flawed. The whole thing about the New Testament teaching is that it's not secret any longer. It's an open secret. It's been unveiled in Jesus. And Revelation says that. It says, I'm unveiling it. Yes, we don't understand all of it. Yes, I understand that there's all the imagery and all the rest of it that is hard to figure out. But as I said to one person who said to me once, oh, I'll never understand it. I said, you probably understand it more than you think. Because Revelation is not so much addressed to our cognitive brains as it is to our imagination. We should feel it and see it more than try and figure it out with our heads all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the questions that has come through is about the fact that our eschatology or our understanding of the end actually affects the way we live life here now.
Absolutely.
And I know different authors have commented on that, different theological authors. So how would you maybe say that this knowledge of the end or of the consummation of all things, how should that affect us here now? How should that affect the way we live today, tomorrow, for the person who's a mum here, or for the person who they probably need to go pick up their kids, or for the person here who's a pastor or who's a business person? How should this understanding change the way they live their life?
Well, I'm hoping that it would increase their commitment to Jesus and their passion for Jesus. So I've said that already. I hope that it also increases their sense of hope that the world is not out of control, even though it might look like that, and that God is working through to bring about that great new world that he promises in the end of the book of Revelation. I'm hoping generally, though, that reading the book of Revelation, instead of scaring the pants off people, it should challenge them. It should challenge them to be more committed and not to be settled in a middle class, comfortable kind of lifestyle. That was probably the problem with the church in Laodicea, the lukewarm church, that they got too settled. You know what I find in the Bible generally? God is always unsettling us. God is always. So, I'm not going to offer you a solution that allows you to be comfortable, because I don't think the Bible actually allows that.
That's beautiful. And I wonder if there's maybe what we're feeling at the moment as Christians is this kind of unsettling feeling a little bit, which should hopefully inspire us to live so much differently. And like you said, full of passion, as a people on mission and as a people full of hope with their eyes on Christ. John, I was wondering if there's any last words you would have for us. I know we've only got a few minutes left. Any advice you'd give us about how to deal with things going on? Yeah.
Well, as I said, I guess the number one thing I'd say right now is keep a sense of proportion. All right. Yes, we're going through very difficult times in the world today. And I think everybody knows that. That's not me saying anything very remarkable. Keep a sense of proportion. Remember that, we've had trouble in Australia with lockdowns, and we've had, a lot of other stuff. And even now we've got thousands of people catching COVID-19 every day and people dying. And that's horrible. There's no two ways about it. But keep a sense of proportion. Worse things have happened in history. At least we're not going through a world war. Okay, Ukrainians are at war. They've been getting killed hand over fist. So let's keep a sense of proportion when we start complaining about our lot. Remember that a lot of people have had a lot worse than us and have a lot worse than us right now. So I think that's probably one of the things I want to say to everybody is, yes, realize there's a lot of bad things going on. And there are a lot of worrying trends in our community. You know, I think in Australia, we're seeing an increased hostility even towards gospel and Christians. And that worries me. But I go, okay, people have done that. There are people being persecuted and killed for their faith right now. Why am I so concerned about myself? And I think if we keep that sense of proportion as we look at what's going on around us and as we read our Bibles, I think it will help us to not get comfortable, but at least to get a sense of balance.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thanks again, Jon, for, I can see some of the comments coming through, which I really enjoy actually, are saying things like, thank you for such a balanced and relevant approach to this topic, because it's been quite scary with the diversity and the seeming polarization going on. If I can just give a big shout out to Jon as well, one thing that really touched me in our webinar practice is just Jon's humility with this. And Jon's been doing this for 30 years. So it kind of, I think if someone like Jon, who's literally written three books on this topic and has been doing it for 30 years, still has a lot of humility about him on this topic, I pray that you are inspired to do the same. I hope that this webinar today was informative. I hope that it was inspiring, and I hope that it equipped you to go and be who you're called to be, better than you've ever done it before. And you need to know that we as a college are praying for you, we're believing in you, and we're so thankful you are here and hoping that you were blessed by this content. If you'd again join with me, clicking the little clap icon or putting some prayer hands in the chat, please thank Jon for us now. Thank you so much. Well, guys, that's it. As I said, there will be a recording and an email with Jon's book sent to you all in the next week or so. So please keep an eye on your inboxes for that. Remember that we are called to keep Jesus in our focus as we interpret the times and read this book of Revelation. Well, we're so thankful for you. We love you lots and bless you now. Thank you.